Tell me who the father is right now, or I will lock the doors to this restaurant and burn it to the ground with everyone inside." Kang Min-jae's voice did not echo in the dead silence of the dining room. It suffocated it. He didn't yell. He didn't have to. The absolute, frigid certainty in his tone was enough to paralyze every breathing soul in the room. He stood towering in the center of the aisle, a shadow wrapped in a bespoke black suit, his cold, obsidian eyes locked onto the swelling curve of the waitress's stomach. Aisha's hands trembled violently. The silver serving tray she had been holding slipped from her grip, crashing against the hardwood floor. Plates shattered, glass splintered into 1,000 jagged diamonds. Broth pooled around the toes of her worn, non-slip-work shoes. But she didn't look down. She couldn't. Her wide, terrified eyes were glued to the man standing mere inches from her, the man who owned the sole underworld, the man no one dared to look at twice, and the man she had been running from for 8 agonizing months. "Min-jae?" Her voice broke, a barely audible whisper that cracked under the immense weight of the room's terror. They said a man like Kang Min-jae didn't have a heart anymore. The streets whispered that after his sudden, high-profile divorce, after the mysterious disappearance of his wife, and after the ruthless, bloody purges that solidified his absolute power over the city's syndicates, he had evolved into something entirely inhuman. He was untouchable. He was dangerous. He was a phantom of violence who had not set foot in this run-down district of Seoul in years. But no one knew the truth about the black woman he had left behind. Aisha wasn't supposed to fall for a man like Min-jae. When they first met, he was already powerful, a rising dragon in a world built on extortion, blood money, and shadows. He was surrounded by men who carried guns in their waistbands and threats on their tongues. But when he looked at her, when he smiled at her under the neon glow of the streetlights, he wasn't a mafia boss. He was just a man who bought her flowers, who kissed her forehead, who promised her a life far away from the grit and the grime. They had married fast, drowning in a love so intense it burned everything else away. They loved hard, but they broke even faster. The memories flashed behind Aisha's eyes like a nightmare on a loop. The dark study, the heavy oak door left slightly ajar, the hushed, venomous voices in the dead of night. She remembered holding her breath, pressing her ear to the crack in the door, only to hear the one thing she was never meant to hear. A deal, a betrayal, a ledger of names marked for a purge. And there, spoken from the lips of Min-jae's closest lieutenant, was her name. She had fled that very night. No goodbye, no explanation, just a packed duffel bag, a forged identity, and a train ticket to nowhere. She thought Min-jae had let her go. She thought she had vanished into the concrete jungle of the city, safe to build a life from nothing while carrying the secret that could destroy both of their worlds. Until this exact second, rain slammed violently against the glass windows of the restaurant, mirroring the storm raging inside. The patrons sat frozen like statues, their meals abandoned, their eyes glued to the floor. Min-jae's elite bodyguards, 5 men in identical dark suits, had already moved without a single command, shifting seamlessly to block the front exit, the kitchen doors, and the alleyway fire escape. Min-jae stepped over the shattered porcelain, his polished leather shoes crunching the glass into dust. He stopped so close to Aisha that she could smell the familiar, intoxicating scent of sandalwood and expensive tobacco clinging to his coat. He stared down at her stomach again. His jaw tightened so hard the muscle ticked visibly beneath his pale skin. The sheer presence of him was a suffocating weight. "Who's the father?" he repeated. Cold, direct, merciless. Aisha swallowed the giant lump of pure terror in her throat. She instinctively wrapped her arms around her pregnant belly, a protective shield against the monster standing before her. "Does it matter?" she whispered, her voice shaking but her chin lifting in a fleeting spark of defiance. It was the wrong answer. Chairs scraped violently against the floorboards. His men shifted, hands drifting instinctively beneath their jackets toward their holstered weapons. The air in the restaurant dropped 10 degrees, turning sharp, electric, and incredibly dangerous. Min-jae stepped into her personal space, forcing her to lean back against the edge of an empty table. He lowered his face, his lips brushing the shell of her ear as he dropped his voice to a lethal, gravelly murmur. "It matters if it's mine." Her silence was deafening. She didn't deny it. She couldn't. Her silence said everything words could not. Min-jae's eyes widened for a fraction of a second, a micro-expression of profound, world-shattering realization. The child was his. The heir to the Kang syndicate was growing inside the woman he thought had abandoned him. But before the gravity of the moment could fully settle, a chilling sound sliced through the ambient noise of the rain. The sharp, rhythmic buzzing of a phone. Min-jae's right-hand man, Taeho, stepped forward, his usually stoic face drained entirely of color. He held out a burner phone, the screen illuminating a live, dark web bounty board. "Boss," Taeho whispered, his voice trembling as his eyes darted to Aisha's terrified face. The blood money contract. It just reactivated. Someone in this room just broadcasted her face to the Yamato Syndicate. The bounty wasn't closed. They didn't just track you here tonight, boss. They tracked her, and the hit order just went live. Pandemonium erupted, but Min-jae's reactions were forged in the fires of 100 gang wars. Before the patrons could even register the threat, his hand shot out, gripping Aisha by the waist and yanking her violently against his chest. "Clear the room. Strip every phone." Min-jae roared, the cold, composed mafia don vanishing instantly, replaced by a ruthless predator defending its own. His men descended like wolves. Tables were flipped, patrons were slammed against the walls, and cell phones were confiscated and crushed under the heels of combat boots. Aisha gasped, struggling against Min-jae's iron grip, her hands pushing frantically against his chest. "Let me go." "Min-jae, stop!" she cried out, panic seizing her chest as she watched the violence unfold. He ignored her entirely. He threw his tailored overcoat over her shoulders, shielding her body and her pregnant stomach from the prying eyes of the room and the danger lurking in the shadows. His arm remained locked around her waist as he dragged her out the back exit, plunging them into the freezing, torrential rain. The alleyway was slick with mud and neon reflections. A convoy of armored black SUVs waited, engines purring like caged beasts. Min-jae shoved her into the back seat of the lead vehicle before climbing in right behind her, slamming the heavy ballistic door shut. The outside world was instantly muted. Aisha shrunk back against the plush leather seats, her breathing shallow and frantic. She looked at him, truly looked at him, for the first time in nearly a year. He looked older, harsher. The soft edges of man she had loved were entirely gone, replaced by sharp angles, dark circles, and the undeniable aura of a killer. "Where are you taking me?" she demanded, her voice regaining a fraction of its strength. "You can't just abduct me. Min-jae, I have a life here. I have a job." Min-jae turned his head slowly, his eyes dragging over her. He took in the faded, cheap fabric of her uniform, the exhausted bags under her dark eyes, the alarming thinness of her arms and face juxtaposed against the heavy swell of her pregnancy. A muscle in his jaw throbbed. The realization of her suffering hit him like a physical blow. While he had been busy becoming a legend in the underworld, drowning his heartbreak in blood and power, she had been out here, surviving. Aisha had worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, just to keep a roof over her head. She lived in a tiny, drafty apartment on the absolute edges of the city where the neon lights didn't reach. She skipped meals so she could afford prenatal vitamins. She cried in silence under the thin sheets of her twin bed, terrified of the shadows, terrified of the syndicates, terrified of the future. She had walked into every harsh, sterile doctor's office alone, staring at the ultrasound screen without a hand to hold, because the man who should have been sitting right beside her, marveling at the heartbeat of their child, was a ghost she had to flee from to stay alive. Min-jae didn't know. He hadn't asked. When she vanished, his pride and his rage had blinded him. He never looked back. Until now. "A job." Min-jae echoed, his voice vibrating with a dark, dangerous edge. He leaned closer, invading her space until she was pinned against the door. "You are serving ramen to drunks for minimum wage while carrying my child. You look like you haven't slept in months. You are starving, Aisha." "I am surviving," she fired back, tears of frustration finally spilling over her lashes. "Something I wouldn't be doing if I had stayed in your house." He flinched. It was a minuscule movement, but Aisha caught it. The hardened mafia boss actually flinched. "Stop working," he commanded, his voice dropping into that absolute, unyielding tone that made entire gangs surrender. "You are done. You're coming with me to the estate. My doctors will look at you. My men will guard you. You will never lift a finger again." Aisha blinked, staring at him as if he had lost his mind. And then, despite the fear, despite the rain pounding on the roof, despite the terrifying reality that an active bounty was on her head, she laughed. It was a broken, tired, hollow sound, a laugh devoid of any joy. "What?" Min-jae growled, genuinely confused by her reaction. "You think you can just issue an order and rewrite reality?" Aisha asked, wiping a tear from her cheek. She sat up straighter, refusing to shrink away from him. "You don't get to decide that anymore. Min-jae, you lost the right to command me the night I walked out. I am the father of that child. And you are the reason this child is in danger," she screamed, her voice bouncing off the bulletproof glass. "You think I wanted to leave? You think I want to scrub floors and serve tables until my back gives out? I left because of you, because of the world you dragged me into." Min-jae fell silent. He stared at her, breathing heavily, the ambient streetlights passing over his sharp features in flashes of gold and shadows. That was when he saw it. He didn't see the fragile, delicate woman he had married. He didn't see weakness. He didn't see the fear that used to make her hide her face in his chest. He saw strength. Pure, unadulterated, feral strength. The kind of raw resilience she had forged in the fires of his absence. It was a strength he had completely failed to protect when he had the chance. And for the first time in his blood-soaked reign, Kang Min-jae, the untouchable ghost of Seoul, didn't know what to do. The silence between them was heavy, thick with unresolved trauma and a desperate, terrifying love that neither of them knew how to handle. The SUV sped to the rain-slicked streets, carrying them toward a destination Aisha didn't agree to, locked in a metal cage of the ghost of her past. But as the convoy turned the corner, blending into the heavy traffic of the Metropolitan Highway, the headlights of a sleek, black sedan flipped on in the alleyway they had just abandoned. The sedan slowly pulled out into the rain, its tires hissing against the wet asphalt. Inside, a man in a tactical vest adjusted the earpiece sitting tight in his ear, his eyes fixed dead on the taillights of Min-jae's convoy. "Target acquired." The assassin murmured into the comms. "She's in the lead vehicle. The ghost is with her." Initiating the strike sequence. The tension inside the Kang Syndicate's private estate was agonizing. For 2 days, Aisha remained a prisoner in a gilded cage. Min-jae had stationed guards at every door, heavily armed men who treated her with an unnerving, silent reverence. The estate was a fortress of marble, glass, and security cameras, perched high in the hills overlooking the sprawling, smog-choked expanse of Seoul. Aisha refused the luxury. She refused the gourmet meals prepared by the private chef, opting instead for the simple bread and water she could fetch herself. She refused the silk robes, wearing her oversized, faded hoodies. And most of all, she refused Min-jae. Every time he entered her wing of the house, his eyes desperately seeking hers, she turned her back. The psychological warfare between them was brutal. Min-jae was a king who could command armies, but he could not command forgiveness of the woman carrying his child. On the third evening, the storm outside worsened. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long, wavering shadows across the grand living room. Aisha had reached her breaking point. The walls were closing in, the memories of their past life suffocating her. She needed air. She needed reality. She managed to slip past the internal security detail. She knew the blind spots of the house. She used to live here, after all. She found the keys to one of the inconspicuous staff vehicles, a modest gray sedan, and slipped out through the subterranean delivery garage. She just needed a drive. An hour alone in the city. An hour to think without the crushing weight of Min-jae's guilt staring at her from the corner of the room. It was the deadliest mistake she could have made. 10 minutes down the winding mountain road, the headlights of a black car appeared in her rear-view mirror. Aisha gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles turning white. She told herself it was just a commuter, just a local resident navigating the treacherous hills in the rain. But when she took a sharp left turn toward the city's outer district, the black car matched her maneuver perfectly. It didn't use a turn signal. It just followed, a silent predator stalking its prey in the dark. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, terrifying rhythm. She pressed her foot down on the accelerator. The gray sedan surged forward, its tires slipping slightly on the wet pavement. The black car sped up. It wasn't his men. Min-jae's men drove armored SUVs, and they would have immediately flanked her and boxed her in to protect her. This was someone else. Someone who knew the blind spots of the Kang estate. Someone who remembered the deal from years ago. The exact same deal that made her run in the first place. Panic seized her throat. Aisha fumbled for her phone on the passenger seat, her trembling fingers swiping desperately to unlock the screen. She didn't call the police. The police couldn't help her in this world. She hit the only number she had memorized. Min-jae answered on the first ring. Aisha, his voice was tight with an undercurrent of panic. Where the hell are you? The guards just realized you're gone. Min-jae, she gasped, her voice cracking as she took a violent turn, the tires squealing against the flooded asphalt. Someone is following me. A black car. They've been on me since I left the hills. Silence on the line, followed instantly by the sound of a chair violently shattering and the roar of a man abandoning his humanity. Where are you? Min-jae screamed, the background noise erupting into chaotic shouts as his men mobilized. Give me a street name. Aisha, keep driving. Do not stop. I'm on the Route 4 bypass, heading toward the old industrial district. Suddenly, the black car accelerated with terrifying speed, slamming violently into her rear bumper. A scream ripped from Aisha's throat. The gray sedan lurched forward, spinning out of control. Her phone flew from her hand, sliding under the passenger seat. Min-jae's frantic, screaming voice echoed from the speaker, tiny and helpless amidst the roaring engine and the rain. Aisha, talk to me. The black car pulled up alongside her. Through the rain-slicked window, Aisha saw the dark tint lowered just enough to reveal the muzzle of a suppressed submachine gun. The emblem tattooed on the shooter's hand belonged to the Yamato Syndicate. The ghosts of the past hadn't just come back to haunt them. They had come to collect. The first volley of bullets shattered the passenger side window. Glass exploded inward, showering the interior. Aisha instinctively threw her arms over her stomach, slamming her foot on the brakes. The sudden deceleration caused the shooter to miss the fatal headshot, the bullets ripping through the dashboard instead. But the gray sedan had lost traction. The wet road offered no grip. The car hydroplaned, spinning wildly across the empty bypass. Aisha fought the wheel, her breath coming in ragged, terrified gasps. By the time Min-jae found out the exact location from the tracker in the staff car, it was already too late. The gray sedan slammed sideways into the thick concrete pillar of an overpass. The sound of crushing metal was deafening, a horrible, apocalyptic crunch that drowned out the thunder. The airbags deployed with a violent concussive force. Then absolute silence. 15 minutes later, the screeching tires of Min-jae's convoy ripped through the industrial district. He didn't wait for the vehicle to stop. He kicked the door open while the SUV was still moving, tumbling onto the wet asphalt and sprinting toward the mangled wreckage of the gray sedan. Aisha, he roared, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony tearing from his throat. The rain washed over the wreckage. The driver's side door was crushed inward, and there, dripping down the twisted metal and pooling onto the cold, unforgiving pavement, was blood. So much blood. Min-jae fell to his knees in the rain, his trembling hands reaching for the shattered window. The untouchable king of Seoul was reduced to nothing. The hospital trauma center was a chaotic blur of blinding fluorescent lights, frantic shouts, and the agonizing, high-pitched beeping of medical machinery. Min-jae's men had completely locked down the wing. Heavily armed guards stood at every corridor, their weapons drawn, eyes scanning for any remaining threat. But all the firepower in the world couldn't stop the enemy that was currently claiming Aisha's life behind the double doors of the operating room. Min-jae stood entirely frozen outside the glass windows. His bespoke black suit was soaked with rain and stained dark red with his ex-wife's blood. His hands, usually so steady when holding a gun, shook uncontrollably. A team of doctors rushed past him, pushing a cart of fresh blood bags. She's losing too much blood. Fetal heart rate is dropping. We need to perform an emergency crash C-section right now, The lead surgeon yelled, the door swinging shut before Min-jae could move. He didn't step forward. He didn't issue a threat. For the first time in his entire life, Kang Min-jae was paralyzed not by shock, but by fear. Real, suffocating fear. The kind of fear that no amount of money, no extent of mafia power, and no global empire could fix. He was the most dangerous man in South Korea, yet he was completely and utterly powerless to save the only two things he had ever loved. A doctor burst back out of the doors, his scrub splattered with red. He looked at Min-jae, terror in his eyes at having to deliver the news to the underworld boss. Sir, the trauma to the abdomen is severe. The mother is hemorrhaging. We might have to make a choice between... Min-jae lunged forward, grabbing the doctor by the collar of his scrubs, lifting him entirely off the ground. The guards instinctively raised their weapons, the tension in the hallway snapping like a wire. Save them. Min-jae's voice cracked. The gravelly, menacing tone was gone, replaced by a desperate, shattered plea. Tears, hot and uncontrollable, spilled over his dark eyes. Save them. Both of them. Or I swear to God, there won't be a soul left alive in this city to mourn you. He dropped the doctor, who scrambled frantically back into the operating room. Min-jae collapsed against the cold tiled wall, sliding down until he hit the floor. He buried his face in his blood-stained hands, the heavy, metallic smell of it clinging to his skin, a horrific reminder of his failures. Hours passed. The storm outside finally broke, giving way to the pale, weak light of dawn. The silence in the hallway was unbearable. Every second felt like a blade twisting in his gut. Then, suddenly, it pierced the quiet. A cry. A sharp, loud, indignant wail of a newborn baby. Min-jae's head snapped up. He stopped breathing. The doors slowly pushed open, and the lead surgeon stepped out, pulling down his bloody surgical mask. The man looked exhausted, utterly drained, but there was a faint glimmer of relief in his eyes. She's alive. The doctor exhaled heavily. We stopped the bleeding. It was a close call, Mr. Kang, but she's stabilized. A pause, a small smile breaking through the exhaustion. And it's a boy. He's strong, very strong. Min-jae closed his eyes, his head tilted back against the wall, and for the first time in 8 agonizing years, he truly breathed. The suffocating weight on his chest lifted, leaving behind a profound, overwhelming sense of gratitude. Days later, the private VIP recovery room was bathed in the warm, golden light of the afternoon sun. Aisha slowly blinked her eyes open. Her body felt incredibly heavy, numb from the painkillers, and her mind was thick with confusion. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound in the room. She turned her head slightly on the pillow. Sitting in the chair beside her bed, his elbows resting on his knees, was Min-jae. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wore a simple black sweater, his hair unstyled, dark shadows under his eyes indicating he hadn't slept a single minute since the crash. He looked utterly defeated, yet entirely at peace. He wasn't sitting there as a mafia boss. He wasn't sitting there as a powerful, untouchable king. He was just a man who had almost lost everything. Aisha stared at him, the fog in her brain slowly clearing. The memories of the crash, the terror, the pain, and then a memory from much deeper in the past. The memory of the fevered dream she had experienced while fading in and out of consciousness on the operating table, where the fragmented pieces of the truth had finally aligned in her mind. I heard everything, she whispered, her voice incredibly weak, raspy from the intubation tube. Min-jae stiffened, his head snapping up, his eyes locked onto hers, filled with immediate, desperate relief that she was awake, mixed with deep, lingering sorrow. Aisha, he breathed, leaning forward. The deal, she continued, struggling to form the words. That night, I heard Taeho read my name. I thought you sold me out to the syndicate. I thought you put my name on the purge list. Min-jae froze completely. The color drained from his face as the realization of why she had truly run finally hit him. He had thought she couldn't handle his lifestyle. He had thought she fell out of love. He had no idea she thought he was her executioner. It wasn't you on that list. Her voice shook, tears welling in her tired eyes as the absolute truth finally settled in her heart. It was me protecting you. Silence stretched across the room, thick and suffocating. "The Yamato Syndicate demanded my head in exchange for peace," she whispered, the tears spilling over. "But you didn't give me to them. You put my name on the ghost list. You staged a deal to erase me from the grid, taking an entire war onto yourself just to keep me hidden, but I ran before you could explain. I ran right into the crosshairs. Everything you believed, that she hated him, that she abandoned him, was wrong. And everything she believed, that he was a monster who marked her for death, was a tragic, devastating misunderstanding born of a man trying to save the woman he loved the only way he knew how, in the shadows." Min-jae reached forward, his large, scarred hands trembling as he gently took her small hand in his. He held it carefully, incredibly lightly, as if terrified she might shatter or worse, disappear into wind again. He pressed his forehead against the back of her hand, his shoulders shaking as a single tear escaped his eye and dropped onto her skin. This time, his voice was entirely different. It wasn't the gravelly threat of a boss, nor the cold demand of a king. It was softer, broken, devoted. "I'm not letting you go. Never again." Aisha squeezed his hand weakly, letting her eyes close as profound peace finally washed over her. They had survived the storm. They had their son. They had the truth. But down below, outside the gates of the hospital grounds, standing in the pouring rain, a figure in a dark trench coat watched a heavily guarded VIP window on the 4th floor. The man lifted a burner phone to his ear, his eyes narrowing as he observed the perimeter of Kong Syndicate guards. He found out. The man whispered into the receiver, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. "The woman lived. The child lived. And Kong knows we were behind the hit." A pause as a static, distorted voice replied on the other end. The man in the rain smiled, a chilling, hollow curve of his lips. "Understood," he said softly. "Should we finish it?"